It's Thursday, September 22nd. My name is Ashton Ellett, here with another installment of the Senate Staff Oral History Project, sponsored by the Richard B. Russell Library for Political Research and Studies at the University of Georgia. I'm here today in Washington, D.C. with Mr. Anthony Coley. Originally from LaGrange, North Carolina, he earned his bachelor's degree from Morehouse College in Atlanta and his master's degree in legislative affairs from the George Washington University here in our nation's capital. Since February 2021, he has held the position of Director of the Justice Department's Office of Public Affairs, and he serves as the DOJ's Chief Spokesperson. Prior to his role at Justice, he served as Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Office of Public Affairs at Treasury Department from 2011 to 2015. In the United States Senate, Mr. Coley served in top communications positions with United States Senators Zell Miller of Georgia, John Corzine of New Jersey, and Edward M. Kennedy from Massachusetts, as well as the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, the HELP Committee, which Senator Kennedy chaired. Mr. Coley has also worked as Communications Director for Representative Harold Ford Jr. of Tennessee. At the state level, he was Governor Corzine's press secretary and later New Jersey's Director of Public Communications. I'm already exhausted.
I will tell you, Ashton, I'm the only person in America who's worked for both Zell Miller and Ted Kennedy.
Yes.
This I know for sure. This I know for sure.
So thank you, Anthony, for
coming
and spending some time with fitting us into your I'm sure incredibly busy schedule.
It is, but this conversation I have been very much looking forward to. Working for Senator Zell Miller, and I did it twice.
That's
right. For Senator
that was
Miller.
one of my first questions. Like, well, what happened here?
I did it twice because he was both very generous to me as a young staffer, and he was, motivated, I think, by a Semper mantra, which is do the most good as you can for the most people. And this is my paraphrasing of the word, but I think when you look back at the arc of his life, I think that's an accurate way to sum up what he was all about. How do I do the most good for the most people?
How did you come to work for was he your first job on Capitol Hill?
So he was not. So
okay.
I graduated from Morehouse
right.
in May of 2000. In April, March of that year, Al Gore was on the ballot.
Right.
I think at the time, Georgia was a Super Tuesday state. So I got a chance to work for then Vice President Gore's presidential campaign in Georgia. I also did some work in Iowa, then worked in Georgia. And in Georgia, I met Keith Mason, who I'm sure you talked to.
Keith's a good friend.
Keith is a good friend and a good dude, genuinely good guy. And after Gore failed to take office, I still wanted to come to Washington, and I called up Keith. And Keith called Alex Albert, who was then the chief of staff. And I came up and I met Alex and I met Joan Kirshner. And that's how I got to there was, I was a press person. I did communications on the campaign, on the Gore campaign. And so I wanted to stick with communications, but that job wasn't available.
Right.
So I was a staff assistant, like most 21, 22-year-olds on the Hill. And then shortly thereafter, there was an opening to be Joan's deputy. And I got that, and I was then Senator Miller's deputy press secretary. And that was kind of January, February 2001.
Okay. Now, what issues were you and Joan dealing with during that stint with Senator? I always call him Governor Miller, even though he is Senator. With Senator Miller's
So
staff.
there are two ways I answer that question. In terms of topical areas, tax cuts were at the top of the agenda, and then 9/11. Right? And I'll talk about both of those.
Yeah.
I think more broadly, it was very helpful to me early on in my career as I knew I wanted to do communications work. I had the wonderful opportunity to work with Joan, who had covered then Governor Miller during, I think, all of his 8 years as governor, as an Associated Press reporter.
Right.
And it was a wonderful learning experience for me because Joan, she had been a reporter her entire career, and she thought like a reporter, and she would shape narratives and messages like a reporter. And so I was a sponge, and I soaked all of that stuff up. And what I learned directly from Joan during that first period that I worked together, I still use to this day. So it was an incredible learning experience for me. And I'm also the low man on the totem pole, so I'm doing clips. I'm doing clips, and doing clips for Zell Miller in 2001 requires somebody to be up really early in the morning. I'm sure everyone listening to this has probably read his books, and they know that he was an early riser. So that worked for me. To my mother's chagrin, I have always gotten up early, even as a child.
Oh, no.
And so I would get up. I would be in the office easily before, I can't remember exactly what time, but easily before 5 o'clock. Maybe it was like
Before 5?
Yeah, before, because he would get to the office pretty early. And at the time he lived across the street in the Methodist building, so it wasn't much of a commute. But clips were done, maybe, we had to check with Joan, maybe by 5:15, 5:30 in the morning, which means you have to get up early. And he and I got to spend some quality time together in the wee hours of the morning. And that's really the moment where I got to know him during those hours where it were just the two of us in the office.
What was he like on a personal level? I think people are familiar with his sort of larger than life character on television and in the legislature. But what was he like as a person, as a boss, as somebody that you got to know in those early hours of the morning?
So he was genuine. He had high standards, which everyone would hope, and I don't say that in a bad way. He had high standards. And everyone in the DC office, from our chief of staff on down, we never wanted to disappoint him. And that's, I don't know that that's unique to our office, but it is pretty commonplace on the Hill. When he met my mom, I grew up in LaGrange, North Carolina, which is arguably the only place in North Carolina that is smaller than Young Harris, Georgia. And my mom came up that summer, and she got the photograph, and he spent real time with her on an incredibly busy day. I grew up as an only child, and he recognized that the work ethic that I had was in large part influenced by my mother. And Senator Miller had this way of just, like, he knew intuitively a lot of things. Some of it, I think, is just raw political acumen. But he just is hard to characterize. But he just knew things, and he spent just real time with my mom at a time when it was incredibly busy. Going back to what you asked me about, kind of policy type of issues.
Yeah.
I remember on 9/11. If I can jump ahead.
Absolutely.
There. September 11th, 2001. Again, I was Deputy Press Secretary, and Martha was in the office. Francis was in the office, and he was, of course, in the office. And I think we all knew, he knew before we did, I think, that something was really wrong. You remember early on there was reporting that there was one plane, and it perhaps was an accident. Yeah. And he was, that morning, he and Phil Graham of Texas were going to introduce a bill on lowering the capital gains tax rate. And I forget, the press conference may have been at like 9:30, 10 o'clock in that morning. We, of course, weren't able to do that. And soon thereafter, we had to evacuate the Capitol. But those were just, it was a moment in time where we know now that the world would change. He provided just a moment of calm and stability, which you would hope to see in our elected leadership at a time when staff needed it. We soon ended up having to leave the Capitol, but I remember very well how calm, how collected, how reassuring a figure he was for congressional staff in his office when we actually didn't know what was happening.
Sure. Now, how did you make the transition from Senator Miller's office to Representative Ford's office? So Harold Ford Jr. obviously, I grew up knowing Harold Ford Jr. from Morning Joe and MSNBC.
Well, I will tell you how that happened. I will tell you how that happened. Senator Kennedy had a very long-standing relationship with Don Imus.
Okay. Yeah.
And that was one, and I got to know the Don Imus producers when I was working for Senator Miller the first time. And I asked them to put Congressman Ford on air and to try him out. Oh man, this is bringing Zell Miller and Don Imus. Those are some good times, man. Those are some real good times. I hadn't thought about that in a while. I hope you have seen some of this kind of footage, because they were both huge country music fans, and Emmylou Harris and some of the other greats of the time, where they would just not just talk politics, but just talk pop culture.
Yeah.
And wow, I'm reminiscing, man.
That's
You're gonna
right.
have to, if I'm going off on a tangent, just cut me off.
It's great because what was the transition like going from the Senate to the House?
Yeah. So thank you.
Why did that come about?
So it was an opportunity. I was number 2 in the Senator Kennedy's office, and this is an opportunity to
Senator Kennedy or Senator Miller?
Senator Miller's office.
Okay.
And this is an opportunity to run my own shop and to work for someone that I also admired. And the House and the Senate, I am what they call a Senate snob.
Go on.
I didn't like the House very much. I liked the members. I liked Congressman Ford a lot. But at the time, the Senate was just more collegial, and people were really trying to get a lot of things done. You know, I look at the partnerships that Zell Miller, a Democrat, had with Phil Gramm of Texas, right, on tax rates. I look at the relationship that Ted Kennedy had with John Boehner, right? And they were really, it was more of an appetite to work across the aisle and to get stuff done. I didn't see that as much in the House.
Sure.
As I had hoped. And so as soon as I could get back to the Senate side, I did.
So that was no commentary on Representative Ford.
Oh,
it
not
was a
at
commentary on the institution of the House as it was in 2001, 2,
That's
3.
right. That's right. And there are a lot of good people who were trying to do good things over the House.
Sure.
I think gerrymandered districts have, I mean, you're the historian, but in many ways it has created a disincentive for people to find the reasonable middle. And that's what I hope my career is about, and I wanted to work for members who were about that, finding
Right.
that middle ground, that reasonable middle on which they could all agree. And that was the beauty of Zell Miller and his life and his work. And so I came back to the Senate side in 2003.
Had Joan moved up?
John had moved up to be chief of staff.
Right.
And so they asked me to come back to be communications director. And to his credit, at the point, there were only 2 African American communications directors in the United States Senate. I was one of them. Mark Pryor from Arkansas hired Rodell Molyneux as the other African American communications director at the time. You saw, this is probably the best opportunity to just talk about not just his commitment to finding the middle ground, but of creating a staff that looked like Georgia, that looked like America. I mean, we had so many prominent people, prominent now, but we're just hardworking senior staffers back then. Jocelyn Moore comes to mind, who went on to do many great things in her life. But you know, he was deliberate and intentional, even going back to his period as governor of appointing diverse, racially diverse, gender diverse individuals to judgeships, for instance, and to other high government positions. So that's something that gets lost in the story of Zell Miller, and he was intentional and deliberate about it.
Were there ever issues, 2003, 2004, Senator Miller was pretty outspoken, and we can talk about this when we talk about your move to the Kerry Edwards campaign.
Yeah.
Were there any issues that you personally were sort of frustrated by the stance the senator took, or wish he had made a decision that he hadn't, or wish he had changed his mind on something, especially as the communications guy who had to be out there advocating for and defending Senator Miller to the press and to everybody? Was there ever a moment that came up when you were just like, I really wish I could be arguing the other side of this right now?
Sure. At this point, you want me to tell you what it is, right? But
you don't have
to. Listen, there is.
But that's something true for especially every communications person.
That's exactly my point.
Liz
you will
Smith
never
makes
find,
this point in her newest book.
As a staffer, you will never find a candidate or a member in this instance with whom you agreed on every issue. You're just not.
Right.
And principals themselves will tell you they don't agree with themselves on every issue, that they evolve over time. And so, of course, there were those issues.
So, when you left Zell Miller's staff and went to the Kerry Edwards campaign, what was your role with the Kerry Edwards campaign?
This is actually a funny story. I was mindful. I wanted to have a career in Democratic Party.
Sure.
I knew where he was going. And I knew that just wasn't my political identity.
So you were aware of...
Absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely.
Okay.
And I just, it wasn't, I don't want it to sound like a divorce, because some people will say, well, we grew apart. But he was always very generous to me, even when we knew where he was headed. And I was very firmly left of center in a way that, I wanted the Democratic nominee at the time to be president. No disrespect to the Republican nominee at the time, but I wanted to support John Kerry. And he told me, he encouraged me privately to do it. And this is a great story. He encouraged me to do it. He supported it even, knowing where my career could go. if I went to work for Kerry. Publicly, he told, it was either the AJC or the Associated Press, publicly he said, "I've always said I've learned the most from the campaigns I've lost." And I think every young political operative like Anthony should have that experience.
Oh, that's a sick burn.
It was great though. Like,
Was he right?
oh, he was absolutely right. I learned a heck of a lot in that campaign. A heck of a lot. But that was just, it was classic Zell Miller, and I loved him for it. My mother didn't like it. It was the Associated Press because I think it ran in our local paper in North Carolina, and my mother didn't like it. She thought it was a little too hot, so she took his picture down off the wall.
Oh no!
But it was all in. He was having fun, and I was having fun, and to your point, he was right. I learned a heck of a lot.
So, I think one of the most high-profile moments that Zell Miller is the only person so far who has keynoted a Democratic National Convention and a Republican National Convention.
Yeah.
What was your reaction to one, Miller's speech to the RNC? And I think the most high-profile thing was his showdown with Chris Matthews. Were you surprised by either of those as somebody who knew Zell Miller very well, especially on a personal level?
I saw it. I can't remember exactly what my reaction was, but I noted it.
So obviously, like you said, the campaign was not successful.
It was.
And you come back to work for John Corzine, and I'm trying to. You mentioned we've talked about Ted Kennedy and Zell Miller, and I can't think of many people more different from Zell Miller than John Corzine of New Jersey, a former Goldman Sachs CEO. What was it like going to work for John Corzine? And obviously you had a long, very, very fruitful career with Senator and Governor
So
Corzine.
listen, it is always an adjustment
when
you go from one principal to another principal. When I went from Zell Miller to Harold Ford Jr., I wrote a line one time. I was incredibly busy. I had to get something out, so I was just writing. And in my mind, this is like 2 or 3 weeks after I started, I said something in Harold Ford Jr.'s voice, like, "That dog won't hunt." No. This is me. I'm 22, 23 years old. I still had Zell Miller in my head. And Ford Jr. gets it, and he calls me from the airport. He's like, "Coley, this isn't quite me." So there's always an adjustment period. But the one thing that they both, Kennedy and Corzine and Miller and Ford Jr., the same thing that they had in common was trying to find that middle ground. Mm-hmm. And I was only supposed to be working for Corzine for a brief period. This was 2005. I was in grad school.
Okay,
from
so you're at George
03
Washington.
to 05, with the exception of some time I took off in 04 to work on the campaign. So in 05, I am in grad school at night, trying to wrap up this thing. Right? It was. And so Corzine at the time was running for governor.
Right.
And so he needed someone in his official Senate office to just keep the trains going, to do that job. And so I did that while I was going to school at night. I had no idea that he and I would connect like we did. And I ended up moving up to New Jersey when he got elected governor. I had actually purchased a house in 2005 in Prince George's County, Maryland, because this is now going to be my home. And 2 months later, 3 months later, I'm on a train to Jersey. So that's life in politics.
And you were in Jersey for quite a long time, well, relatively for political.
For politics.
In politics.
I was there for 2 years.
So I mentioned Liz Smith's book, Any Given Tuesday, and I think she had your position in the second campaign,
Okay.
communications director, and she talks about how brutal the New Jersey press can be,
Yeah.
and how it's different. It's a different beast from the DC
Very much
press
so.
or the Georgia press.
And I will take it a step further. It's not just the press; it's the politics. I like to say that I learned policy in Washington, in the political process in Washington, and how to move the ball forward in important ways. But just watching the Zell Millers of the world and these relationships that he will cultivate over time. New Jersey taught me politics. New Jersey taught me politics. And
We're talking brass knuckles.
Yeah. It was, it was a tough period of time. I'm grateful for the experience, and I met a lot of really good people there. But I was eager to get back to Washington as soon as I could.
That's what I was going to ask. Is which did you prefer? And obviously, you came back and you took a job with the Lion of the Senate, Ted. What was that experience? Now I know this is obviously a very difficult period in his life. And at the twilight of his life and his career.
Yeah.
But what was that like? What was that like getting to have that experience with him?
It was great. It was just really quite exceptional. And again, the underlying part for all of my experiences in the Senate is to work for people who could move the ball forward in meaningful ways.
Right.
And there are few people in the history of the United States Senate who worked across the aisle to advance meaningful landmark legislation. Ted Kennedy, Orrin Hatch on children's health, for example. And there are hundreds of other examples like that. And so this was a real opportunity for me to be a part of something that was really great and was really special. The Senate is not like it is now.
Yeah.
We've
heard that. We've heard that a lot.
Millers and the Ted Kennedys of the world, they're just not. It's not what it was.
So since 2011, you've been in the executive branch.
On and off.
On and off.
Yeah.
You had some stints in the private sector as well. How do you compare the working in the executive branch, communications in the executive branch, to being the communications guy for one of 100 in the U.S. Senate, or one of 435 in the House of Representatives?
So it's a great question. I think at its core, the objective is the same, right? To articulate in meaningful ways the mission and the priorities of the principal or of the agency. Now I manage vastly more people, and I have a really big press corps who are in the building every day. And so those are a couple of the notable differences.
Well, it's 11 o'clock. I don't want to keep you too long.
Yeah, whatever. Happy to keep going for another few minutes.
Okay. Well, what I was going to say is, what advice would you've mentioned, and you're not the only one, who's mentioned how the Senate has changed and how it's, some have gone as far to say that it's not a really functioning body right now. Yeah. It's governance by chaos, governance by emergency, and there's not bipartisan legislation that has to work to make it through the Senate.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to that 18, 19-year-old, 20-year-old college student like you were way back when?
Yeah.
Is the Senate, is Congress someplace that they should still try?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you think about the strength of our democracy is only as good as the people who are in the building, in the room, making the laws. And they depend on young, enthusiastic, and bright and talented people. I would absolutely encourage people to roll up your sleeves and get involved. And when you do, find ways to get outside of your bubble, to interact with and make friends with people who are on the other side of the aisle. And I think that's important.
Right.
And there is not enough of that. Put yourself in situations. One of the things that I did when I was working for Senator Miller, Joan and I both did this one summer. We started training for the Marine Corps Marathon. And neither one of us ran that summer, but it was an opportunity. Every year, the Marine Corps Liaison's Office provide training for their marathon in the fall for congressional staff.
Right.
And folks who were once on the Hill or off the Hill. And it's just one of those ways outside of the work environment where you can get to know people in other houses, in the other chamber, in the other party. And some of the friendships that I met even back then, some 15, 20 years ago, easily 20 years ago, started because we put ourselves in situations outside of the office environment to get to know people.
Right.
And that's important. Hearing, telling that story brings me back to another memory I have of Senator Miller. I remember pretty well when Lester Maddox died.
You okay?
Remember Lester?
Oh, yeah.
Lester Maddox,
Oh,
for whom Senator Miller, I believe, worked. My memory is
He did. He was executive director of the state party under Lester Maddox,
Right.
and then pardon and paroles, I believe.
so. So when Lester Maddox dies, I'm the senator's communications director, and Lester Maddox was ran on a platform of segregation. And like other former governors, it would be appropriate for Zell Miller to release a public statement. Who's that fall to? It falls to me. Which is a bit of a, as a black man from the South, having to write a statement for a former governor, now senator, about a man for whom the current person worked, but was also segregationist, right? How do you do that? And this is the type of person I wrote a statement. I think it was pretty good. It talked about the beautiful love story between Governor Maddox and his wife, and a couple notable things Maddox did on his watch. If memory serves, the State Patrol Georgia State Patrol was integrated on his watch. There were a couple other things, and I mentioned those. And then I wrote a line in the Miller statement that history will remember him well. And I think we faxed it to him. I can't remember exactly how we got it to him. And he made one change. He says history will remember his administration well. And then he called me and thanked me for it, because he said, I can't imagine how difficult that was for you to write this statement. And I got it right for the most part. But that's the type of person that he was. Number one, he gave me an opportunity to shine and to be in this role. And then when you're faced with a situation like this is the job. Like, it's my job. Like, I signed up for it. I have to do it. Glad to do it. Glad to have the opportunity to do it. But he recognized the moment, and he spoke to me about it. And that was, it was just incredible to work for a guy who wasn't just on autopilot.
Sure.
But who would stop and recognize things like that.
Well, Anthony, I think that's a great place to leave it. Anything else you'd like to record for posterity before we?
It was truly one of the great highlights of my life to know this man, to have the opportunity to work for him on behalf of the people of Georgia, and I hope history remembers him well.
Well, next time you're down in Georgia, come to campus. We'll show you around the library and probably pull out a few of your memos or statements that you wrote.
I would love that. I would love to see that.
We'll take a walk down memory lane together.
Oh my goodness.
How's
Thank
that
you
sound?
so much.
Thank you very much, Anthony. On behalf of the Russell Library, we really do appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.